Do you really think you know everything about the My Hero Academia universe? Think again. Long before Izuku Midoriya ever dreamed of entering UA, there was a silent war taking place in the shadows of society. A war fought by ordinary people, people with powers considered useless, people that society rejected and that the hero system ignored. These people had a name: Vigilantes. Imagine a world where a glowing baby is born in China, and suddenly everyone on the planet begins developing extraordinary abilities. Chaos takes hold, crime explodes, and while the great heroes fight in the headlines, who protects the little people? Who saves the ordinary citizen who never makes the news? This is the story of Koichi Haimawari, a failing college student with a sliding quirk so useless, it barely reaches the speed of a bicycle. A guy who missed his chance to become a professional hero. A young man who gets beaten up by bullies, works horrible jobs, and lives in a destroyed apartment. But when night falls, Koichi transforms into the Crawler. He is not alone. Kazuho, a masked idol with a secret kept for years. Knuckleduster, a mysterious man who beats up criminals but hides something devastating. He has no powers, none whatsoever, just iron fists and a personal mission. Together they form the most UN-likely vigilante trio in Japan. But in the shadows, a mysterious substance called Trigger is turning ordinary people into terrifying monsters, all sharing one characteristic: a dark tongue. Who is behind it? The answer will shock you, because there is a villain who has infiltrated their ranks. We'll discover how the Vigilantes gave rise to the hero system we know today, the appearance of heroes you already know, Aizawa, Ingenium, and more, an emotional battle between father and daughter, how a useless power becomes the most versatile ability of all, because when professional heroes are too busy, when the system fails the little ones, when no one else cares, the Vigilantes show up. This is My Hero Academia, Vigilantes, the never-told story of the illegal heroes who fight not for fame, but because there is a hero's soul inside them that nothing can extinguish. In this video, we'll get to know the summary of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, an anime that surprised me, as I am a true fan of My Hero Academia. If you enjoy summaries, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Leave a like on the video to help it reach more people. A share helps a lot, especially to help popularize this incredible anime even further. Everything begins on an apparently normal day, when we witness the birth of a peculiar child in China, a baby that emits its own light. This event marks the starting point of this narrative, since from the appearance of this mysterious glowing baby, people around the world began developing extraordinary abilities. That was how a new generation of human beings came into existence, and those who possessed these powers were quickly classified as heroes. However, even with the world already home to these powerful individuals, there exist beneath the surface people who were not chosen. Individuals who, even having awakened their abilities, are catalogued as illegal heroes. The story we follow takes place a long time before Deku makes his entrance at UA, and focuses on a completely different protagonist. With that established, we are introduced to our protagonist, whose name is Koichi, a young man studying at university who is left in awe when he witnesses All Might eliminating crime from the city, since seeing the hero ranked number 1 across the entire planet is something that definitely does not happen every day. However, as I mentioned just now, Koichi is far from being someone who seeks confrontations, and that becomes clear when, while rushing toward the university, he accidentally bumps into a group of bullies who quickly move to intimidate him. Even without showing any kind of bravery, Koichi does in fact possess a special power, which consists of the ability to glide across any type of surface. Although at first glance, this might seem like an extremely useful power for travel and locomotion, we quickly discover that the maximum speed Koichi can reach is comparable to that of a regular bicycle. In other words, for our protagonist, it is a completely useless power that simply is not worth anything. That said, after an entire exhausting day at university, when he leaves, Koichi must fulfill his responsibilities at his part-time job. It is here that the young man comes across a rather strange underground show put on by this masked girl, who is recognized both by her distinctive makeup and her beautiful and melodious voice. The girl appears to have a considerably large fan base, and another characteristic that draws a lot of attention to this mysterious woman is her quirk, which consists of being able to jump much higher than an ordinary person ever could. Reflecting a little on his own situation, Koichi reaches the conclusion that life is sometimes something deeply unfair, since compared to a truly spectacular jumping quirk, our protagonist ended up with a rather silly and ridiculous power that serves virtually no useful purpose. To make matters even worse, Besides having to put up with an absolutely dreadful part-time job, poor Koichi also seems to still have to deal with his habitual bullies, who give him a tremendous beating without any mercy. And finally, after night falls, despite having gone through an absolutely horrible day, we learn that Koichi maintains a secret life because when he is not working or studying, our protagonist disguises himself as a vigilante, using his useless power to do good and beneficial things, such as returning lost items, helping people who are lost to get their bearings and find their way, recycling materials, or any other type of help and assistance that does not directly involve him in real danger. Curiously, after finishing an entire shift working as a vigilante, our protagonist accidentally and unintentionally runs into the strange girl mentioned earlier, whom we shall call by the name Kazuho. This girl shows herself to be quite surprised to see how Koichi, despite having a power that is of little practical use, managed to make a small group of people appreciate and value him for doing small things that genuinely help society in some way. After talking with each other for a little while, the group of bullies mentioned earlier enters the scene once more. Here the guys, upon seeing Kazuho present at the location, quickly move to intimidate her, doing so simply because she is a girl who wears makeup and sings using a rather strange and unusual power. Upon witnessing this happening, at first Koichi thinks and considers that the best course of action would be not to get involved in the situation at all. Although upon seeing how the girl was on the verge of shedding tears, Koichi tries to defend her the best he can, only to receive a violent beating from the bullies, as a reward for his attempt. Upon seeing how things seem to be getting completely out of control, fear takes hold of Koichi and he cannot do very much, simply waiting passively for his inevitable end. Although just when it seemed as though absolutely everything was going to end terribly, we notice how out of nowhere a mysterious man falls from the rooftop, making quite a peculiar and theatrical entrance. This man is called Knuckleduster, and despite showing no type of visible special power, this man engages directly in punching and brawling with the abusers, who upon seeing how they were being brutally dominated and overpowered, could not do very much against his precise and powerful blows. After completely finishing off the massacre of the bullies, we notice how Knuckleduster quickly turns his full attention to our protagonist, to whom he offers the opportunity to join his mission and cause, as Knuckleduster also comments and reveals that he saw the good deeds performed by Koichi and perfectly knows how much Koichi deeply admires All Might. That is more than enough reason for Knuckleduster to want to transform our protagonist into a true and genuine hero. Despite Koichi doubting his own capabilities for having such a completely useless power, Koichi also quickly perceives and notices that Knuckleduster is not an official and licensed hero, and that is because this man holds no license whatsoever. Although for Knuckleduster, a hero license does not mean anything important at all, since the true hero is the one who has an unbreakable and steadfast soul, and constantly fights for justice. But well, this philosophical conversation is abruptly interrupted by the bully from before, who refuses to give up in any way and takes Kazuho hostage in a desperate act. Despite this, Koichi, deeply motivated by Knuckleduster's inspiring words, decides for the first time in his life to completely ignore his paralyzing fear and attack directly without hesitation. Thanks to this, with the crucial help of Knuckleduster, the young man manages to dominate and subdue the last remaining bully. With things now calmer and more under control, we notice how Knuckleduster simply seems not to listen or pay attention to our protagonist's firm refusal to join his group of illegal heroes, as the muscular man without further ado and without asking permission takes Koichi as his official apprentice. This is something quite uncomfortable and inconvenient for our protagonist, who despite repeating over and over again that he does not want to join an illegal gang of unlicensed heroes in any way, Knuckleduster simply seems to not give the slightest importance to his objections. But moving on to more important and relevant things, it turns out that Knuckleduster seems to be actively looking for one specific person, since it happens that there is someone who has been using and distributing a mysterious liquid that significantly enhances a person's powers. Unfortunately, these amplified powers are being used exclusively for evil and malicious purposes, and the professional heroes are far too busy with other matters and issues, which is exactly where the Vigilantes come in to fill that gap. Additionally, Knuckleduster also comments and reveals that the people who use and consume this mysterious liquid, in addition to undergoing a visible physical change, also have their tongues turned completely black. Here we also see and witness how the mysterious person Knuckleduster is intensely searching for comes across the bullies mentioned earlier, and after injecting them with the mysterious liquid previously mentioned, the guys undergo an absolutely frightening and terrifying change in their bodies. But well, with that established, We see how on the following day, Koichi seems to be accompanying Knuckleduster on his tireless search for the mysterious figure distributing the substance, although in the process and during the mission, our protagonist once again runs into Kazuho, who sincerely thanks him for having rescued her the previous night. Here the girl decides to join the mission of our protagonist without hesitation, while both were actively searching for any villain, displaying a black-colored tongue as a characteristic. We notice how Knuckleduster completely out of nowhere begins to suspect a man who sells various toys. Fortunately for everyone present, just when things seemed as though they were going to get extremely intense and violent, Eraserhead appears on the scene, a quite popular hero who is known and famous for completely nullifying the powers of any person he looks at. After that, we go through a quite uncomfortable and tense moment where our protagonist and Kazuho seem to be very frightened and nervous about the complicated situation, since a professional hero has stopped and detained them, and that is definitely a bad sign, as he mistakenly confused them with dangerous villains. Despite all of this, we notice how Knuckleduster does not seem to want to yield or submit before Eraserhead in any way, and this is exactly when an intense and dramatic hand-to-hand confrontation between the two begins. Here things do not seem to be going so well for Knuckleduster, who receives the first painful blows of the fight. Despite all this, we can clearly see that Eraserhead senses something quite strange and unusual happening, since upon using his special quirk to completely erase and nullify powers, it does not seem to work on Knuckleduster in any way whatsoever. This is exactly when the teacher consciously decides not to continue fighting and battling, using as his official excuse that he has no concrete evidence to accuse Knuckleduster of anything. Although in reality, what happens is that Eraserhead did not want to continue fighting because he clearly realized that the man has absolutely no power whatsoever, being merely a robust and muscular guy who genuinely wants to do good for society. On the other hand, while Knuckleduster was fighting intensely against Eraserhead in physical combat, Kazuho and Koichi discovered that the strange toy man had in fact been directly involved in the strange incidents with the bizarre transformations that have been occurring recently. The bad and problematic part of all this is that while trying to follow and track him, Koichi quickly runs into the bullies from before once more, who want to start a violent conflict against him for no apparent reason. Here our protagonist manages to escape by the skin of his teeth, and fortunately, as Knuckleduster enters the scene at the right moment and manages to defend Koichi effectively. But that is not absolutely everything, as Eraserhead also offers them his support and assistance to stop the dangerous villains who appeared out of nowhere without warning. Despite all this, the situation dramatically worsens and deteriorates, since the mysterious figure from before was not actually a normal and ordinary person, as this person was transporting the strange power-enhancing liquid inside the toys mentioned earlier. And upon finding himself in an extremely delicate and dangerous position, the man without further ado decides to inject a large portion of the serum directly into himself, in order to completely transform into an absolutely super-powered giant. This giant quickly captures Kazuho with his enormous hands, although here is when Knuckleduster does absolutely everything within his reach to save the girl in danger. Though despite managing to temporarily distract the threatening giant, Kazuho is released and dropped from a height far too dangerous to survive the fall. Upon seeing this happening before his very eyes, Koichi, without thinking twice or hesitating again, activates his true hero spirit, and without further delay, uses his power in an extremely creative and innovative way to save Kazuho from certain death, although in doing so risking his own life in the dangerous process. Though despite narrowly escaping death twice, Koichi seems to be in an absolutely delicate and vulnerable position, as he is about to be completely crushed by the fearsome and powerful threatening giant. To his great fortune and salvation, Eraserhead enters the scene dramatically, who upon using his special nullification quirk manages to completely eliminate the villain's giant growth gift, causing him to rapidly shrink down to the size of a normal and ordinary person. And without further delay, the teacher manages to capture him with ease. With the arrival of the police at the scene and the dangerous villain in secure custody, Eraserhead sincerely thanks Knuckleduster for the crucial intervention he made to help him win. Despite all this, the teacher does not agree in any way with ordinary civilians risking their lives like this, doing so to do the dangerous work of professional heroes. Despite hearing this clearly, Knuckleduster firmly maintains his position, saying that there are specific things that official heroes cannot do in any way, since these heroes cannot and do not handle small minor tasks. This is exactly where Vigilantes come in to fill that void. And for that very reason, he will do absolutely everything possible to apply justice in his own way, even though that is technically illegal under the law. That said, clearly, returning to Koichi and Kazuho, We notice how the girl seems to be extremely grateful to our protagonist for heroically saving her life, but that is not absolutely everything. As Knuckleduster also sincerely congratulates the young man for having used his power in such a creative and innovative way, enthusiastically commenting that with a little dedicated practice and training, our protagonist could even go on to become a true professional hero in the future. With that established, we notice how Knuckleduster, Koichi, and Kazuho form a small but significant alliance among themselves to take care of various jobs around the city, such as stopping dangerous thieves, helping people in need, and preventing violent conflicts before they escalate. Here we also notice that Koichi now wears special motorcycle gloves and protective gear in order to act properly as a vigilante hero. But not only that, as our protagonist also now has a new hero name, and it is the Crawler. Despite all this, the bad guys and villains still refuse to take him seriously in any way. On the other hand, Knuckleduster also has a slight significant problem when it comes to doing good the right way, as at the slightest provocation or insult he wants to solve absolutely everything with his fists and physical violence, which is definitely not good or appropriate. Despite this, the only one who seems to do her job well and correctly is Kazuho, who manages to convince two people who were engaged in violent fighting to make peace and reconcile, using her natural charm as a woman and her growing fame as a popular idol strategically. Despite successfully solving one problem, things once again become extremely intense and dangerous, as we see how completely out of nowhere another threatening villain appears who has a characteristic black-colored tongue. This clearly means he was a victim of the strange liquid that artificially enhances quirks. Here, despite the villain being very robust, strong, and intimidating, both Knuckleduster and Koichi seem to have significantly improved their coordinated teamwork, as by strategically taking advantage of our protagonist's quirk and Knuckleduster's brute force, the two of them managed to successfully bring the powerful villain down to the ground, with the evildoer already completely dominated and neutralized. We notice how the guys from before seem genuinely surprised to see how some men without an official hero license are out there risking their lives like this. But not only that, as they are also very good and efficient at what they do in practice. That said, Koichi proudly introduces his group as the mysterious trio of heroes who will protect innocent people from any evil that appears. Despite all this, we see how the police, upon finally arriving at the scene of the combat, are quickly informed about the mysterious trio of heroes who defeated the dangerous villain. Here the law, instead of rejoicing at the news, seems more concerned and apprehensive, as some men without an official license are going around risking their own and other citizens' lives, recklessly playing at being real heroes without authorization. This triggers harsh criticism online, calling our protagonist lunatics and irresponsible people who risk their lives illegally without thinking about the consequences. But well, setting aside the harsh criticism from the internet entirely, being a vigilante for Koichi is not easy or simple at all, as by not being a legal and licensed hero, he does not receive any type of monetary payment for his work. For that very reason, our protagonist cannot in any way quit his necessary part-time job, and to that we must also add that Knuckleduster has now joined Koichi's completely unnecessary and extra expenses, increasing his financial problems. We notice that our protagonist's small, modest apartment is now the official meeting center for the Vigilantes to talk and discuss their next planned mission. We also clearly see that both Knuckleduster and Kazuho, despite being active Vigilantes, have completely normal and ordinary lives, as Kazuho is just an ordinary student, just as our protagonist is. But, well, when it comes to being a functional team, Koichi notices how his two patrol companions have completely taken over his apartment, something that does not seem to bother him significantly, although unlike them, Koichi has not yet finished his entire day, as he must go to work at his obligatory part-time job to pay the bills. Despite now having two true friends, Koichi had planned his university life in a completely different and more exciting way, as he thought and imagined he would have many diverse friends with whom he would do normal and age-appropriate things. Unfortunately, and regrettably, our protagonist did not make a single friend at university, something that ultimately depresses him quite deeply. On the other hand, we notice how Kazuho, when she is not present at our protagonist's apartment, efficiently uses her free time as an idol to put on exciting underground shows. This seems to drive her entire fanbase completely wild, as they happily listen to the melodious songs of their favorite star. Despite creating a pleasant and positive atmosphere, we notice that within Kazuho's entire dedicated fandom, there is a small man of short stature. This man, desirous and desperate to be able to get close to his favorite and admired idol, does absolutely everything to attract her special attention, although he fails miserably in his frustrated attempt. Upon seeing that being so small physically he cannot do anything significant, this strange man quickly decides to use an injection with the strange and dangerous liquid mentioned earlier. This one, upon injecting this mysterious fluid into his body, quickly begins an absolutely terrifying and horrible transformation, as he completely transforms into a strange monstrous creature resembling a giant and slimy eel. Here, the terrible frightening monster initiates an intense chase to desperately capture Kazuho. As blinded completely by his sick fanaticism, the young man, now transformed into a horrible monster, left his scruples entirely behind and can no longer differentiate between good and evil in any way whatsoever. Fortunately, and to Kazuho's salvation, our protagonist and Knuckleduster are quickly informed about this dangerous disturbance and how a giant threatening eel wants to capture their companion in danger. Despite doing absolutely everything to capture the strange monstrous eel, we notice that the monster's slippery body is slippery enough that they cannot hold onto it with adequate firmness. This causes our protagonist to quickly devise another alternative plan in order to be able to capture the transformed villain. Knuckleduster, Koichi, and Kazuho specifically ask Kazuho to try to distract her obsessed fan by promising him a warm hug. This at first seems to cause a little disgust and revulsion in Kazuho, as the girl must directly touch the slimy and disgusting monster to temporarily calm him down. Although upon seeing that this is not sufficient to stop him, Knuckleduster and Koichi decide to use powder flour, doing so to prevent the monster from using his natural sliminess to easily escape again. Thanks to this, and to teamwork, our protagonist finally managed to capture the strange man who transformed into a monstrous eel, although they cannot take public credit as the police are once again about to completely dominate the scene. With a job well done and completed, we see how everyone once again comfortably regroups at Koichi's apartment. The funny and ironic part of all this is that despite the apartment legally belonging to our protagonist, both Kazuho and Knuckleduster have already completely taken over the entire place and act as if it were their own personal home too. All of this indirectly seems to deeply please Koichi, who never imagined or thought that life would have prepared and provided him with such peculiar and unique friends as these. On the other hand, returning to the Japanese police, we notice how they thoroughly investigated the recent incidents that occurred involving a strange substance which is officially called Trigger, an artificial power enhancer that causes whoever consumes this dangerous substance to completely lose their sanity. Despite already having the villains who consumed this dangerous liquid in custody, the police have absolutely no concrete trace of who the original supplier of the material is. Since according to the captured and interrogated villains, an anonymous strange man offered them the potent substance for free and at no cost, which makes no logical sense as the mind behind all these incidents does not seem to work for money or profit, but rather for something much larger and more sinister. On the other hand, upon learning that the monster from before has now been officially released by the police, Kazuho has a strong desire to be able to speak with him personally, doing so to investigate more deeply about who exactly is distributing the substance that artificially enhances powers. Our dedicated protagonist joins this investigative mission, carefully taking Kazuho to her obsessed former fan. The curious thing about all this is that Kazuho, being a well-known and popular idol, quickly draws significant attention from people who are her dedicated fans. Even an entire group of fans mistakenly thought our protagonist was Kazuho's boyfriend, something that Koichi quickly and emphatically denies. But well, after arriving at the specific meeting point, we see how the two of Kazuho's fans, already known previously, also joined the girl's sincere desire to be able to speak directly with the man who transformed into a monstrous eel. There is only one significant small problem, which would be Knuckleduster, who despite being fundamentally a good guy deep down, Koichi did not want to involve in this delicate mission in any way, as our protagonist knows better than absolutely anyone that this madman literally resolves everything with his fists and violence, and could completely frustrate the sensitive investigation. On the other hand, we return to Kazuho's fan, whose name is Queen Bee. This girl, despite appearing to be a completely normal and ordinary young woman, is in reality a dangerous villain who works part-time and is specifically in charge of spreading the power-enhancing substance, strategically using her Queen Bee power and contaminating the entire city in the blink of an eye. Fortunately for everyone present, we see how after initiating the coordinated attack, the heroes belonging to Japan quickly make their dramatic appearance, doing so to stop all the people who appeared and were negatively affected by the dangerous substance. On the other hand, Knuckleduster was the only one who managed to perceive and notice that this was caused and triggered by bees that had been artificially contaminated by the substance. But not only that, as it turns out that the villain did all of this to completely take away the crucial witness of the incident with Popstep, so as not to leave loose ends and to prevent our protagonists from investigating who is using and distributing the substance. This is absolutely disappointing and frustrating for our protagonists, who once again completely lost all the leads to find out who is behind absolutely all of these coordinated attacks. But well, with all of this established, we notice how our dedicated group of vigilantes continues diligently protecting the city from small villains who only seek to harm completely defenseless civilians. But well, despite the investigation into the strange substance having had no significant advances, we see how Koichi does not waste absolutely any time, as without thinking twice he sets himself to training like a completely dedicated madman. Although that is not absolutely everything, as our protagonist also noticed that Knuckleduster seems to be acting strange and different, doing so since the incident with the bees and the people who were attacked by the substance. On the other hand, we notice how the villain, despite acting externally like an ordinary and common girl, is in reality using this excuse and facade to be able to seek out suitable victims upon whom she can use the potent liquid. Here we discover that these specific victims must have something in common and shared, which would be significant mental instability, as the villain strategically uses the liquid on a poor habitual substance abuser who surprisingly has extraordinary and impressive results with the artificial enhancer. This once again causes another extremely powerful villain to begin violently attacking the city. Fortunately for all the civilians, the vigilantes were already present at the scene. Here we see how our protagonists managed to successfully rescue every civilian found within the dangerous range of fire. Despite all this, Koichi once again manages to end up within the villain's direct range, and this is exactly when Knuckleduster once again enters into action, without further delay setting himself to fighting intensely against the powerful threatening enemy. This at first seems like a completely lost and impossible fight, as it happens that this villain is far too powerful to beat, since in addition to being more robust and stronger than Knuckleduster, he also has a devastating energy fist which sends absolutely everything flying through the air with force. Despite all this, Knuckleduster manages to skillfully dodge the attacks and maintain an intense bare-knuckle and hand-to-hand fight. But not only that, as Knuckleduster also demonstrates a quite elevated and impressive fighting IQ, as he quickly knew exactly when to strike the villain before the latter used his dangerous energy ability. This blow was absolutely lethal and precise and brought the well-deserved victory to our group of vigilantes. Upon obtaining his hard-fought victory, we notice how this seems to make Knuckleduster very and significantly happy, since in addition to advancing the investigation into the substance, he can also face super powerful villains directly, and the stronger these villains are, the more enjoyable and thrilling it is for Knuckleduster to face them in direct combat. On the other hand, we see how the villain seems somewhat frustrated and irritated upon seeing how the vigilantes once again completely interfered with her careful plans. She also communicates directly to the mastermind behind absolutely all these attacks, that the main problem is our protagonists, who constantly manage to interfere. But despite all this, the girl does not give up so easily in any way, as she still continues actively seeking victims to transform them into powerful villains. On the other hand, the true professional heroes are also actively working on hunting down villains who have appeared throughout the entire Japanese region. Here we meet Ingenium, a hero who, just like our protagonist, has a quirk of rapid movement. Although despite reaching impressive high speeds, we notice how Ingenium has certain significant problems properly controlling his quirk and almost always ends up violently crashing into things. But well, on the following day, returning to our protagonist, we notice how while training intensely, he unexpectedly runs into this strange man, who quickly heroically saves him from colliding with a bag of garbage. And here the man formally introduces himself as Tensei Ida, who is none other than Ingenium in person. Here we see how our protagonist quickly recognizes him immediately. But not only that, as Tensei also quickly and genuinely empathizes with Koichi, doing so because their quirks are quite similar, since both are fundamentally based on rapid movement. Here Tensei tells us in detail how despite being extremely fast, he has serious problems with movement stability, something that reminds him very much of his younger brother, as his brother cannot turn without violently crashing into things. But that is not absolutely everything, as Tensei, being completely captivated by Koichi's quirk, quickly gives our protagonist valuable advice to significantly improve his speed and braking. Here our protagonist immediately puts the advice into practice and quickly realizes clearly that he can achieve greater braking and stability by using his movement quirk in a reversible and creative way. Upon seeing how Koichi demonstrates genuine interest in heroic terms and truly wants to learn to improve his quirk, Tensei quickly and enthusiastically tells our protagonist that he can do absolutely incredible things in the future. Although he must still work very hard and arduously on his speed. For that very reason, Tensei, without much beating around the bush or hesitation, offers Koichi a place at his professional hero agency, doing so after our protagonist finishes his degree completely, since despite not having an official license, our protagonist can significantly help by working as direct support for licensed heroes. But well, after all of this, we see how that very same night, Tensei once again dedicatedly renders his services as a public servant, and tries to capture a mysterious villain who also has a similar speed quirk. Despite now finally being able to catch up with him, Tensei realizes that the villain also has the quirk of being able to fly freely, doing so using functional bat wings. Upon seeing this happening, an entire squadron of heroes belonging to Tensei's company joins in to capture the mysterious flying villain. Despite all this, the man strategically uses his bat quirk to be able to evade the heroes without too many problems or difficulties. This significantly complicates the search, as Tensei must also carefully deal with the innocent civilians who cross his path, something that overly limits his maximum speed. Fortunately for all the heroes, we see how the Vigilantes enter the scene at the right moment, who, being completely accustomed to working at night without too many problems, manage to capture the villain with relative ease. Here Tensei quickly recognizes our protagonist immediately, and instead of taking him directly to the police, on the following day without further ado, sincerely thanks Koichi for having helped him significantly with his work, although he does ask him to return the company card, as Tensei clearly realized that our protagonist already adequately serves the city as a vigilante, something that, despite not being legal or authorized, is something the hero deeply and profoundly respects. But well, despite now having true friends, this was not always the case in Koichi's life, as we see a small revealing flashback where on the first day at university, our protagonist did absolutely everything possible to make various friendships. Despite all this, when Koichi wanted to invite his classmates to his apartment, everyone was completely frightened upon seeing the horrible deteriorated building. This caused Koichi to be seen as a strange oddball, and for everyone to quickly distance themselves from him. But well, for good or perhaps bad luck, Koichi went from being completely alone in his apartment to having 2 additional tenants living there, although these 2 seem to have certain significant problems getting along with each other. But well, as the consecutive months pass, we notice how Kazuho, in addition to being our protagonist's companion, also constantly uses Koichi's apartment to diligently practice, as the girl is a clandestine idol who very diligently rehearses her melodious songs. The curious thing about all this is that we notice how Koichi seems to be very tolerant and patient with Kazuho, as he does not even bother when the girl eats a delicious pudding he had been carefully keeping. What does seem to significantly bother Koichi is when people speak poorly of his combat uniforms, as it happens that the hoodie that is an important part of our protagonist's outfit is an official All Might product. In addition to looking quite simple and ordinary at first glance, this hoodie is extremely expensive and valuable, showing us how Koichi seems to have almost the entire complete collection, missing only the very first one that was originally released, as it happens that our protagonist lost it in the distant past. This is how we see another important flashback. Here we notice a young Koichi, who as a youngster was running completely late for his crucial exam to be a hero candidate. Curiously, he came across a child who had fallen into a water canal due to the heavy rains. Upon seeing this happening, our protagonist could not in any way stand by with folded arms, and without further hesitation, courageously jumped in to rescue the little one in danger. After successfully pulling the child out of the canal, Koichi left his special All Might hoodie with the child, and without further ado, ran desperately to his exam. Unfortunately and regrettably, in addition to losing his valuable hoodie, Koichi also completely failed his training exam to become a professional hero. Despite all this, our protagonist later learned that the child he heroically rescued went on to become a hero in the future. And despite having lost 2 extremely important things in his life, our protagonist felt happy and fulfilled for having sacrificed himself in that way. Upon hearing the complete story, Kazuho, instead of feeling happy with such a sentimental and touching story, seems more irritated and frustrated, as after arriving at her true home, we surprisingly discover that in reality, the strange child from the story was none other than the girl herself. As it happens that in the distant past, Kazuho accidentally tripped and fell into a dangerous water canal, but her luck was heroically saved by our protagonist. This significant event caused Kazuho to develop certain romantic feelings for Koichi, and she never forgot him since then. These feelings became even stronger and more intense when our protagonist saved her again from some dangerous bullies. Filled with these intense feelings, Kazuho finally decides to confess her deep feelings for Koichi, and above all to sincerely thank him for having rescued her on that important day. Although unfortunately for the girl, she was unable to speak properly with our protagonist, as upon arriving at his apartment she found Koichi and Knuckleduster present. Upon seeing that her careful plan had completely failed, the girl decides to become hostile and without further ado quickly leaves the place. Although already at home alone, Kazuho once again bitterly regrets not having said absolutely anything to Koichi. But well, setting aside the romance entirely, we notice how the man they had previously captured by our protagonists, after being extensively interrogated, is released by the police. This is quickly taken advantage of by the villain, who once again gives him a potent dose of the powerful substance that transforms him into a dangerous villain. Upon seeing this happening, our protagonists quickly enter the scene, although they are completely surprised to see how a villain has returned again. Having Knuckleduster absent that specific night, Koichi thinks the best course of action is to buy enough time until the police finally arrive. Despite being able to skillfully dodge his blows, Koichi clearly realizes that this villain seems to be stronger and faster than the last time. This is due to the villain, who seems to have applied a more potent and concentrated dose of the serum to the man. This was enough for Koichi to nearly end up under the enormous threatening fists of the villain. To his great fortune, a fairly skilled and experienced swordsman enters the scene, thanks to whom we notice the villain quickly escapes from the place, as he does not have sufficient strength. Upon seeing him, Koichi sincerely thanks him for his crucial help, and the mysterious man formally introduces himself as Stendhal, another vigilante who is not a hero with an official license. After the combat ends completely, we notice how Koichi was absolutely fascinated by this mysterious skilled swordsman. The curious thing about all this is that in addition to Stendhal, within the district there are also various other vigilantes, people with powers who intervene to save people regardless of not being licensed professional heroes. Here, at the specific request of a Popstep fan, our protagonists decide to meet with another vigilante to exchange valuable information, also investigating the strange man who has been spreading the serum that enhances quirks. But after arriving at the vigilante's location, Koichi and Kazuho come face to face with the strange man from before, who was a bully and attempted to harm our protagonist earlier. His name is Soga, but well, moving on to more important and relevant things. Returning to Stendhal, we can clearly see that he applies justice in a somewhat sadistic and cruel manner, as instead of stopping villains he coldly assassinates them without any compassion, having a list of targets, and it appears that his next objective is none other than Soga specifically. It is also necessary to clarify that Stendhal does not work alone in any way, as he seems to have a strange connection with the dangerous villain. Moving to Soga, we notice how the young man seems to spend his free time visiting his friends in the hospital. But at night, Soga also wanted to work as a vigilante. Although to his bad luck, the young man once again has an encounter with the villain, who motivates Soga to once again try the power-enhancing substance. Although here, Soga firmly refuses, as he does not want to depend on a substance to become stronger. Although this was a serious bad decision, as the villain quickly asks Stendhal to finish off Soga definitively. But not only that, as the girl also strategically uses her quirk to contaminate Soga with the trigger substance, causing him to once again completely lose control. Upon hearing the commotion, Koichi quickly heads to the location to capture a possible villain. Here he senses the presence of Stendhal and Soga, who are having an intense and violent battle. Upon seeing how Stendhal has clear instincts to assassinate Soga, Koichi cannot stand by with folded arms, as despite Soga being a bully, he is completely against murder. Faced with this moral conduct, Stendhal quickly takes Koichi as a traitor who supports evil and completely immobilizes our protagonist, thanks to his quirk, which is the ability to incapacitate anyone by licking their blood. Fortunately for Koichi and Saga, Knuckleduster arrives at the location at just the right moment, refusing to allow his beloved pupil to be harmed. Faced with Knuckleduster's appearance, Stendhal comments that he does not want to violently fight against another vigilante, although Knuckleduster firmly emphasizes that Stendhal is no true vigilante, as he assassinates people who are against peace. With that said, Knuckleduster manages to trick Stendhal with a play on words about his reach with his fists, managing in this way to land an absolutely precise punch on the swordsman, who seems to have been left completely out of action. Despite no longer being able to continue fighting, with his last remaining strength, Stendhal manages to escape from the place, doing so by paralyzing Knuckleduster so he does not pursue him. With the danger already eliminated, we notice how Kazuho finally arrives at the location, doing so to provide support to her companions, and fortunately Koichi manages to come out completely unscathed. The only injured party is Soga, who is treated by Kazuho not so cheerfully, as it must be remembered that this man attempted to assault the girl in the past. Returning to Stendhal, we notice how the defeat seems to have deeply affected the swordsman, as he swears brutal revenge, in this way also breaking the agreement with the villain, who is severely stabbed by Stendhal. To the surprise of absolutely everyone, the villain seems to be immune to the blows that could succeed in killing her, something that raises more doubts about who this mysterious girl is. But well, after the scares of nearly dying from being a vigilante, we notice how Koichi seems to be worried about university, as his work as a vigilante has taken away valuable time from properly studying. This is how we meet Makoto Tsukachi, a girl who seeks out Kachi so that he will show her parts of the city. In exchange, Makoto also offers to help our protagonist with his difficult classes. With this agreement established, Koichi decides to take Makoto to his apartment to show her the reference points around the area she can visit, although this seems to surprise Kazuho, who managed to hide inside Koichi's apartment to spy on the mysterious woman. After carefully cleaning his apartment, Koichi has a small study session with Makoto, who in detail explains to him the topics related to heroes that she has been investigating at university. Here Makoto explains how the first hero association arose based on the already named Vigilantes, as when quirks awakened, the world became filled with chaos. Fortunately, heroes with spectacular quirks established themselves with a base in the United States, and these heroes were the beginning of the hero agencies that are known today. Makoto also suspects that the Hero Association also arose to limit people who had the potential to be villains, although that is already a mere assumption. Taking advantage of the study topic, Makoto also asks Koichi to accompany her to observe the Crawler, a vigilante who has made quite a name for himself in the area. This frightens Koichi as Makoto is investigating him and both his identity and that of his friends could be in danger. Despite this, Koichi cannot refuse, as Makoto's charm and cuteness ultimately convinced him. It is also worth noting that Makoto is the sister of Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi, a young detective who is currently investigating the Vigilantes, as he is against people without a license trying to do the role of a hero. Returning to our protagonist, we notice how during training sessions with Knuckleduster, Koichi has greatly improved with his quirk, as in addition to moving faster, he also devised a weapon consisting of evasive maneuvers to be able to throw his enemies off track. Koichi brings up the topic with Knuckleduster and Kazuho about Makoto and how the girl wants to investigate the Vigilantes. Here Knuckleduster only advises our protagonist to be careful. On the other hand, Kazuho seems very irritated, although this anger also seems to stem from the jealousy she feels. But well, calling it jealousy falls far short, as on the day of the meeting with Makoto, Kazuho decided to spy in order to see how close the girl is to our protagonist. With Makoto back on the scene, we see how the girl decides to do an interview with all the citizens who have had contact with any of the Vigilantes. Here the public's opinions are quite varied, as some believe the Vigilantes are dangerous. On the other hand, another group of people loves them very much. As for them, they are like heroes of the people. After finishing the interviews and calculating the results, we notice how out of nowhere a villain steals Makoto's notebook. This thief seems to have a sucker quirk, which he uses to steal what belongs to others. Faced with this incident, Koichi takes advantage of the situation to work as a vigilante, and despite it having been difficult, manages to rescue Makoto's notebook, impressing the girl. When everything seemed to have ended, Makoto decides to thank Koichi for the help, although this is when the girl also decides to use her quirk, which functions as a lie detector, as Makoto suspects that Koichi is a vigilante, although for some strange reason her quirk did not work on our protagonist. Having gotten nothing, Makoto seems disappointed. Despite this, she does not plan to give up and still shows a desire to continue with the investigation. As the days pass, we notice how Koichi continues with his fight against crime, although after a pursuit, he is saved by a hero. Here we meet Captain Celebrity, a very well-known hero in the United States, although also someone who has an ego through the roof. After returning to the apartment, we learn a little more about Captain Celebrity, thanks to Knuckleduster, who tells us how this hero is full of problems and scandals. In addition, at the moment he finds himself in Japan because he can no longer do anything in his own country. These facts are sufficient for Koichi not to want to have anything to do with him. During the attack of an enormous villain, Koichi unexpectedly ran into Captain Celebrity once more. Here Koichi does everything possible to try to rescue the people at the location, as the captain does not plan to lift a single finger, not before his team sets up cameras to film his feats. Fortunately for everyone, after a long time the captain managed to defeat the enormous villain, all while the Vigilantes took care of rescuing every living being within the danger area. Upon seeing how Koichi rescued a puppy and returned it to its owner, Captain Celebrity congratulates him, although he also tells our protagonist that his All Might jacket is very ugly. And so successively we notice how after the captain's arrival, our protagonist could not stand out in anything, as the American steals all the city's attention. Here we also discover that Makoto is Captain Celebrity's personal assistant, and the two seem to have a close relationship. This makes Koichi suspicious, who learns through Knuckleduster that Captain Celebrity has far too many controversies with women, as in addition to being a womanizer, he already had a wife and worst of all, he also divorced her. Returning to what matters, after hearing how the captain invited Makoto on a date, Koichi decides to play detective, as he fears that Makoto will be publicly hurt by going out with a man who is already divorced. Despite this, we see how Makoto is very distant with the captain. She even decides during the date to call the captain's ex-wife just to irritate him. Upon learning that Makoto has no romantic intentions toward the captain, Koichi seems calmer. This calmness did not last him long, as that very same day, Koichi receives a call from his mother who plans to visit him. This is a problem for our protagonist, as his mother is a very strict woman who expects her son to already have a home, a job, and above all, a girlfriend. At first, Koichi's plan was to ask Makoto to help him by pretending to be his girlfriend, although his mother is so astute that she quickly realized it was a lie. From this point on, things began to get very strange, as Kazuho and Knuckleduster arrive at the apartment. Surprisingly, upon seeing how Koichi's mother was at the location, Knuckleduster for the first time in the entire anime seems to act in a very formal manner, in addition to which he also explains that Koichi and Kazuho are part of his non-profit Community Assistance Association, using as an excuse that the meetings of this group take place at Koichi's apartment. This lie seems to be convincing enough to prevent Koichi's mother from getting suspicious about her son. On the other hand, Kazuho, feeling pressured by not having made a good impression, decides to leave. Not knowing what to do, Makoto and Koichi's mother motivate our protagonist to speak with Kazuho, doing so by telling him to pay her some kind of compliment. And having not much experience with women, Koichi decides to try, although he only managed to comment on Kazuho's outfit and how her clothing seemed improvised. This seems to greatly irritate Kazuho, who leaves the place. Continuing the day, we notice how Koichi gives his mother a tour around all of Tokyo, doing so with Makoto's help, who seems to have utterly charmed the woman, as Makoto is an absolutely lovely person, and the kind of daughter-in-law every woman would want for her son. Unfortunately, things once again get out of hand, as the villain alters a bee with a cat to transform a tourist bus on which Koichi was also present, once again finding himself in danger. Our protagonist asks for Knuckleduster and Kazuho's help, who managed to improvise a cat toy. This was enough for the bus transformed into a kitty to take a different route and move away from the innocent people at the location. Here's also where professional hero Tensei enters the scene, doing everything possible to catch up with the transformed bus. But not only that, as with his company's help, he manages to evacuate the majority of the bus passengers. Unfortunately, that was not enough, as only Koichi and his mother managed to escape from the bus, and Makoto was not so lucky. To make matters worse, Tensei begins to run out of fuel, something that will make Makoto's rescue impossible. This is when Koichi enters the picture, without a doubt offering himself to bring fuel to Tensei. All of this in front of his mother, who seems impressed. After catching up with Tensei, Koichi decides to use himself as bait, doing so to distract the cat, while Tensei rescues Makoto. Unfortunately, Tensei cannot find an opening to be able to board the bus. Upon seeing this, Koichi manages to build up great speed and enter the bus, although this also caused Makoto to discover his identity. But setting that aside, we see how the bus reaches the end of the road under construction, something that forces Koichi to grab Makoto to jump and be rescued by Tensei, although the latter did not manage to arrive in time. But just when everything seemed lost, we surprisingly see how Koichi activates his quirk in a different way, which allows him to fly, although this is not mere coincidence, as his mother explains how as a baby Koichi could levitate, although the woman would always give him a little tap so he would not fly, as she was afraid that her small baby would go up into the air and she would lose sight of him. After rescuing Makoto, things return to normal, although not entirely well, as Koichi's mother seems happy about the friends our protagonist has made in Tokyo. But what moves her most is that now Makoto seems to be genuinely interested in Koichi, as she even blushes when speaking with the young man, something that does not please Kazuho. After the bus incident, we move to Knuckleduster, who in his free time seems to be caring for his beloved wife, as it turns out that the woman had an accident with the already mentioned bees, and it seems that the villain is responsible for this. Moving on to other things, we discover how Sakura is currently searching for the villain at Tokyo's preparatory school, as there were rumors that the woman is a villain who poses as a student. Curiously, Sakura did not find very much, as he only managed to come across her name, since the young man was quickly attacked. After the attack, we discover that Soga is currently working with Knuckleduster, who will do absolutely everything possible to find out the whereabouts of the villain, as the latter was responsible for the attack on his wife and Knuckleduster plans to let her escape for nothing. For that very reason, the vigilante trains and grows stronger, as his revenge plan is still not complete. Setting that aside, we return to our protagonist. Here Kazuho learns that she has been invited to sing at a local karaoke contest, something that at first makes Kazuho doubtful, as she fears making a mistake and feels it is too much for her. As to begin with, Kazuho is like an idol, although she limits herself only to singing at street stands. Here, Knuckleduster motivates her to participate in this event, leaving Koichi in charge of helping the girl. The idea occurs to our protagonist to call upon the opinion of another woman, which would be Makoto. Here the girl feels super enthusiastic, as it seems as though she already knows the identities of Kazuho and Knuckleduster. In addition, participating in a group of vigilantes makes Makoto too excited. Having no other option, Kazuho decides to accept the girl's help, and fortunately so. Here we see how, thanks to Makoto and her contacts, the karaoke contest transformed into a super mega karaoke event, doing so thanks to Captain Celebrity's name, which Makoto decided to use to sponsor this event. Having her great opportunity, Koichi seems very excited, although on the other hand, Kazuho seems to be deep in thought, as the girl had never been under so much pressure. After accepting the invitation, the following day, Kazuho and Koichi head to Captain Celebrity's company facilities. Here, Makoto takes charge of organizing the guest artists who will participate in the karaoke. Here there are singers, dancers, and rockers, although everyone's ego is far too high. Curiously, the leader of the dancers unexpectedly fell in love with the rocker, which greatly eased the tension among the artists. After the meeting, Makoto informs all the artists that in addition to singing their individual pieces, they must perform as an ensemble. In other words, all the artists will sing and play in unison the same song. This seems to trigger problems between two singers, as they do not want to share the stage with Kazuho, fearing they will lose the spotlight. To this, Makoto gives them time to be able to learn and rehearse the song that will be performed with the entire group, and on the day of the ensemble performance, it will be decided who will be the lead for that piece. This seems to put pressure on Kazuho. Despite this, the girl, after receiving the song, does absolutely everything possible to rehearse it day and night. And despite being nervous at first, Kazuho little by little adapted to the song and managed to give her best. Unfortunately, with a week left before the event, we learn that one of the main singers injured her ankle, which rules her out as the lead, as she will not be able to move very much. Upon seeing this, Kazuho, instead of taking advantage of the situation, decides to give the spotlight to the injured girl, as center stage is a place where one does not need so much movement. This idea seems to please Makoto, who also makes a plan to ensure that everyone on stage stands out. Setting aside the event, we notice how the villain seems to be planning something, as she decides to take advantage of the festival to once again carry out an attack before the heroes who will participate in this event, using another monster of dubious origin. As the days pass, we finally arrive at the day of the event, where we meet Hisashi Yamada, a hero who is in charge of being the master of ceremonies for this festival. But he seems not to be the only hero, as at the location present Mike is also present, as well as Midnight, a heroine known for being very sexy. Here we discover that the presence of several famous heroes is to make the festival more attractive, although unfortunately the most famous heroes were unable to attend the event. It turns out that another of the guests was Eraserhead himself, who at the moment did not seem to have very much interest in selling his image. Although just at that very moment, Eraserhead is attacked by an enormous giant eel, which seems to be the villain's doing. The worst part of this is that this eel has quite a large electrical power, which leaves the entire city without electricity in the blink of an eye. Despite once again causing havoc, we notice how Knuckleduster finally manages to locate the villain, and it seems as though he will exact revenge to stop the girl. But before that, this is when we discover that the villain would be none other than Knuckleduster's own daughter. Here we notice how the two of them begin a quite intense confrontation, but despite this, Knuckleduster shows that he does not want to kill his daughter, he simply wants to knock her out with electrical devices. On the other hand, the villain really goes all out, as she activates her hive to get rid of Knuckleduster. Despite this, the old man does not get intimidated, as it seems that he prepared with everything to stop his daughter. Returning to our protagonists, faced with the lack of light, Makoto asks Captain Celebrity to bring some light generators, although first the group must buy time, as the spectators might become desperate and abandon the location. This is when Kazuho enters the picture, as Makoto asks her to buy some time by singing some songs. This at first leaves Kazuho nervous, as singing before a larger audience than she is accustomed to, completely on her own, is something new. Despite the fear, Kazuho with Koichi's support decides to accept, and this is how, after getting herself ready, Kazuho begins with her repertoire of songs. Here we notice how the entire audience becomes enchanted with Kazuho's voice and charisma. This magic even manages to captivate the rest of the idol girls at the location, as they all admit that Kazuju is like a star. Returning to Knuckleduster, despite having cornered his daughter, the old man gets distracted by old memories, as in the past, Knuckleduster had certain problems with his daughter, since he did not allow her to be herself, nor to be in a musical band. This caused various arguments that did not end well at all. To Knuckleduster's bad luck, remembering the past took its toll on him, as the villain still had a hidden quirk, which was that of electricity. This power was sufficient to put Knuckleduster out of action. Curiously, at that very same moment, we notice how the karaoke festival is revitalized, thanks to reserve electrical power, and the sound of the music and people laughing causes the villain to want to destroy absolutely everything in her path. Surprisingly, Knuckleduster, with the little strength he has, does everything possible to stop his daughter, doing so not without first asking her for forgiveness, as Knuckleduster accepts that he was a bad father in the past, and for that very reason wants to correct his present. With that said, the battle continues, as Knuckleduster knows he must go all out if he truly wants to save his daughter. With that said, Knuckleduster manages to land a precise blow to the villain's chest, which momentarily stops her heart. But that is not all, as taking advantage of the fact that the swarm is abandoning the dying girl's body, he decides to remove the queen bee from his daughter's body, doing so to attract the rest of the bees, and with a grenade finish absolutely everything once and for all. Despite having finished off the bees, we notice how the only thing Knuckleduster needs now is to make his daughter's heart start beating again, a task that will be anything but simple. After all these incidents, we notice how the karaoke festival was a complete success. In addition, Kazuho's popularity greatly improved, as several fans wrote letters to her, something that deeply moves the girl, as she has finally made herself known as a singer. On the other hand, Koichi's work as a vigilante continues, although as always our protagonist is saved by Captain Celebrity. Here the hero decides to summon Koichi to talk about the role he plays as a vigilante, as to begin with the captain comments that Koichi risks himself too much being a hero, clearly destined to fail, and only gives him more work when it comes to having to rescue him. Despite these words, Koichi demonstrates that he does not plan to back down, as he is the hero of the people. Moving on to another topic, we also discover how the captain seems overwhelmed, as Makoto drowns him in a lot of work. For that very reason, he also decided to escape to Koichi's apartment to rest. Unfortunately, Makoto manages to find him easily, and motivates the captain to resume his work. Moving on to the hero succession, we discover that the recent villains that have been appearing are being controlled by an anonymous someone. But not only that, as this person also managed to make the quirks of the people affected by the strange substance enter a second phase, thereby changing their human bodies. Returning to our protagonists, we notice how Kazuho, along with the idols from the festival, are now participating in a small promotional event where 3 girls will be making their debut. And despite Kazuho having done everything possible to tell Makoto to help them with the promotion, Captain Celebrity on this occasion will not be able to attend as he is filming a commercial. Faced with this, Kazuho has no other idea than to present Koichi as the guest hero. Curiously, while Captain Celebrity was signing the morning commercial, we notice how the bat villain attacks again. The curious thing is that this villain goes looking for Koichi to defeat him, and since he was singing, It was only a matter of time before the bat managed to find him. Fortunately for everyone, Captain Celebrity once again manages to defeat the villain, and in the process saves Koichi and also the girls' event. With Kazuho's popularity increasing, we notice how everything is going quite well, although Koichi seems to be thinking a little about his mentor and how the latter has been acting very calm lately. Here we discover that this is because Knuckleduster managed to save his daughter, but not only that, as we are also revealed that the villain's true name is Tamao. Despite already having recovered his daughter, Knuckleduster's wife's state of health is still delicate, but the Vigilante seems to be facing it with a lot of maturity. And returning to our protagonist, it seems that he is now very happy and satisfied with his life, as he started out as a nobody whom no one knew, but now he has a group of friends who appreciate him greatly. He has improved with his quirk, and above all, he finally feels part of something. We have reached the end of the mega summary of My Hero Academia Vigilante. This incredible anime, especially since it takes place in the My Hero Academia universe, one of my favorite anime series. I hope you enjoyed the summary, as it takes a lot of work to summarize, record, and edit. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to receive more summaries here on the channel. On screen there are 2 more summaries. I'll see you there.